Text of Chang Ailing's short story Withering flowers. Her parents made a small fortune and renovated her tomb. They added a white marble angel in front of her tomb, with her head lowered and hands clasped, surrounded by a group of little angels at her feet. There are a dozen pairs of white stone eyes up and down. In the cracks of the stone, Shiraishi's hair was flying, and the pleats of Shiraishi's skirt revealed a body of strong flesh, milky white meat jelly cold. It is like a happy tomb scene in movies. Those who lay flowers among the fragrant grass in the setting sun should feel the most perfect sadness. Hidden behind the angel is a small stele with the inscription, "The tomb of my beloved daughter Zheng Chuan Chang." There is also a new style of description written by the trustee on the stele. Chuan Chang was a rare and beautiful girl. She graduated from Hongji Girls High School at the age of 19 and died of lung disease at the age of 21. Love music, love silence, love parents, infinite love, infinite attachment, infinite regret. A flower in memory, an eternal rose. Rest in peace, in the heart of the person who loves you. There is no one who knows you who does not love you. Nothing like that. Indeed, she was beautiful. She liked silence. She died of lung disease, and her death was lamented by everyone. But that was not the case at all. Chuan Chang had an extremely plump body in the past, and what was especially beautiful was her gorgeous wide shoulders. However, unexpectedly, the face on the body is thin and straight, with a small nose, thin red lips, big clear eyes, long eyelashes, and a face full of trembling soul, full of with profound enthusiasm and wisdom. Like Emily, the author of The Soul Returns to Leave the Heaven. Bronte, in fact, Chuan Chang is not smart and has no outstanding points. She is an unlit beacon. Among the sisters, she is not considered beautiful, because there are several stunning sisters above her. The Zheng family are all surprisingly good-looking. Since her father, Mr. Zheng, has looked like the standard young Shanghai gentleman who drinks loco and smokes cigarettes in the advertisements. He has a round face, wide-open eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth are pursed upward. When he puts on shorts and pants, he transforms into a little boy taking baby pills. The two splayed beards represent the old man who needs immediate nourishment. Once the beard turns white, he can become Santa Claus. Mr. Zheng is a young man who has not grown older since the Republic of China because he did not recognize the Republic of China. Although he also knows about drunken women and opium, his heart is still that of a child. He is a child's corpse soaked in a vat of alcohol. Mrs. Zheng thought she was younger than he looked, and often said proudly to people, "Bai bribed him to go out with me." People saw that I was much younger than him, and they treated me as his concubine. The handsome Mrs. Zheng and her handsome daughters are always the most popular group at festive gatherings. Even though she didn't understand English, Mrs. Zheng would still shout to the other side across a huge auditorium, "Come here, Langxi, Lucy, Sally, Valley." At home, they became Big Hairy and Dermao. Head, three-haired head, four-haired head. There are three more sons. The youngest son was born to a concubine. There are many children and heavy burdens. Mr. Zheng is often in debt and his wife is full of worries. But after all, Mr. Zheng is a bit of a celebrity, and he is open-minded. When he has money, he gives birth to children outside, and when he has no money, he gives birth to children at home. Most of the time there was no money, so the family had many children, and the pain was still the same after birth. When it comes to things at hand, it cannot be said that Mr. Zheng is not generous and buys whatever he asks for. Lying on the opium kang, the children beat their legs while reaching for the money in his pockets. If he didn't ask for it, they would clench their fists and beat them wildly, making their father laugh and shout, "Oh, he's beaten to death. Now he's really beaten to death." During the Chinese New Year, he was the leader in playing money, playing Paigao in the bank, and would not let him stop until he lost all the copper coins he had exchanged for 200 yuan. However, all joking aside, even when he got angry, he turned against others. Mr. Zheng is a farce that has been running for 40 years, and his wife is a long and monotonous tragedy. She hated him for being irresponsible. She hated him for having so many children. She hated him for being unhygienic, putting a spittoon in front of the bed, but he insisted on spitting into his slippers. She would always waddle around the room with her face raised, cracking melon seeds in a dejected manner, a beautiful, pale, desperate woman. No wonder Mrs. Chang is discouraged. When she first got married and her family was still relatively wealthy, she would save a little for private use. However, the financial system of the Chang family is the most elusive thing. I don't know how she lost her little savings in just one roll. It was rolled up completely. After all, Mrs. Chang was not out of the habit of a woman. She knew that she could not keep it, but she continued to accumulate money. Although the family affairs were a mess, she also made some money out of the chaos. This little money gave her endless troubles because her husband is an expert at coaxing money. It's hard to say whether the Chang family is poor or rich. The large family of who? New maidservants live in a bungalow with only 2 beds. The ladies packed their blankets and went to the guest room to make a bed on the floor every night. The few pieces of furniture in the living room were also borrowed. Only one radio was installed by myself, and there were the latest popular records in the gramophone drawer. They kept eating snacks, and the family took a car ride to watch a movie. The child's teeth are decayed and he has no money to repair them, and he cannot afford pen refills at school. The servants had no choice but to continue working because they were owed too much wages. The servants opened a table of rice in the kitchen, and all the servants in the alley came to share it. The long benches round the 8 immortals table were crowded with people. When the cook's distant relatives come to the city, they always stay in Chang's mansion. The ladies couldn't afford the new silk shirts, and the cloth gowns were too cumbersome, so they simply wore a hollow cotton robe. After a few months, they took it off and stuffed it in a box. The next year, if it got moldy, they had to make a new one of. The stockings had been dragged off by others before they were put on my feet. When I found them again, the holes in the stockings were bigger than the stockings. Constantly muttering and fighting openly and secretly in this situation where the jungle is strong and the jungle is strong. Although these girls grew up in the brocade bush, they are actually as energetic and capable as children who pick up coal cores. This is all behind the scenes, in front of others. There is no daughter who is more gentle and courteous than them. And there is no sister who puts their arms round each other and is friendly. It's not like they won't be perfunctory. The fierce competition in life since childhood has turned them into capable people. Chang is the most honest among the sisters. She speaks slowly and has a bit of a temper. She is the youngest daughter and is born to be bullied by her elders. She also has a younger brother who takes up the love of her parents. So she has no time at home. She was free from grievances, but her family provided her with the most rigorous training. Due to their family status, the daughters of the Chang family cannot be female clerks or typists. Being female marriage clerks is their only way out. Although you can't learn any specialized skills at home, you still need to have some skills to gain a foothold. It can be said that Chang entered the bridal school in one fell swoop, but she had little room for development in terms of grooming. Her sisters are well versed in cosmetology, and they unanimously concluded my little sister is suitable for student-style dressing. My little sister's face and hair still look good without perming. The plainer the little sister's clothes, the better. It's rare to find someone like this. It goes with a blue cloth gown, but the little girl looks more playful in a blue cloth gown. So Chang wore a long blue gown all year round, light blue in summer and dark blue in winter. She never quarreled with her sisters over choosing the same fabric at the same time. The sisters added, my little sister is wearing the red and yellow stockings that are popular now, and her legs look fatter, like German sausages. It is better to wear short socks or go barefoot. They added, little sister, you can't wear leather. It will make you look older. However, the collar of the woolen coat that the third sister did not want was decorated with some old green sheepskin. But it was not ugly for the younger sister, because the sleeves of the coat were too short, leaving 2 or 3 legs exposed. 1 inch wrist, dressed like a growing child, innocent and cute. After finally getting through to this day, all the sisters got married, and Chang suddenly became beautiful. But she is not busy looking for a partner. She desperately wanted to wait until her father had money to send her to college, have a good time for 2 years, and find a suitable man calmly. When the father is rich, he must have a lot of money. so much that he is willing to spend it on his daughter's tuition. His daughter's college diploma was originally the most arrogant luxury. Mr. Chang was not busy arranging the engagement for Sichuan Chang. He said, "I really can't afford to marry off my daughter every year. Just because we talk about saving money, we have exhausted all our possessions. If another girl marries another girl, we, the old couple, will have to live with her as companions." However, Mrs. Chang's words were reasonable. No one in the Chang family spoke irrationally. Even the little brother could still make sense after he peed on his pants. She said, "What's going on now if you don't do it?" When she introduces her friends, she introduces herself. When she meets a good person, she found it herself, and she will not accept your affection. When she meets a bad person, if you object again, it is already too late. From now on, we will always be relatives, which is in vain. It hurts feelings. Mrs. Chang is very interested in choosing her son-in-law. It was a reddish coal in her dead life. Although she bore her husband many children and was still having them, she lacked romantic love. At the same time, she is a good woman. She has neither the courage nor the opportunity to be satisfied in other aspects. So, she looked for a man in the same way, but she found him as a son-in-law. She knew that this beautiful, but sad mother-in-law had some emotional status among her son-in-law. After the second and third ladies got married, they all went to the mainland with their uncle. Mrs. Chang entrusted the affairs of Sichuan to the eldest daughter. Marrying a daughter has always been the first and most embarrassing thing. From now on, it will be easier if one takes the other. My eldest uncle has a classmate who has just returned from Vienna. International students who have just returned to China are said to be greedy and easy to catch. This man practiced medicine. His name was Zhang Yunfan, and his family was very well off. When Chuan Chang met Zhang Yunfan, she felt at first that he was not tall enough or black enough. The first prerequisite for her ideal is physical stature. He also didn't speak fluently. He spat out each word carefully, just like eating dates at a grand banquet, slowly spitting out the kernels in a small silver spoon, and then secretly tipping them to the side of the plate. By accident, the kernels fell from his mouth. It slid directly onto the plate and made a clanking sound, which was unethical. The wording is also too careful. Good means good and bad means not so good. And Hui likes him. Chuan Chang's initial impression of him was purely negative. Not enough for this, not enough for that. However, after meeting him several times, she fell in love with him for the same reason. Not only does his family have some foundation, he is also a person with some foundation, and he was neat and tidy, very different from the people in her family. She liked the flower tips in his hair and his slightly protruding lower lip. Sometimes he wore dark-rimmed glasses. Maybe it was because he was the first possible man in front of her. But she had no chance to compare. She never had time to get close to the second person. First, her eldest sister invited her to dance, and the second time, Zhang Yunfan returned the invitation. And then Mrs. Chang invited her, also in the restaurant. There is already a feeling from all sides that the big deal is settled, Mrs. Chang said. When they get engaged, I will go to Yunfan's hospital to take a checkup on egg sigwang. I always suspect that my lungs are not strong. If I weren't worried about the examination fee, I would have gone to take a checkup earlier. I don't want to have a shadow of doubt in my heart all these years. I also have stomach pain, so I asked him if he had any ready-made medicine for a couple of injections. From now on, when the little ones get wind and stomach upsets, they don't need to ask anyone for advice. Now they have a brother-in-law. Mr. Chang said with a smile, if you want to buy stocks of a pharmaceutical company, and someone is acting as a consultant, you can go ahead and make a big move. Mrs. Chang changed her expression and said, when will you see me buying stocks? Where did I get the money? Did you give it to me with your left hand or with your right hand during the Mid-Autumn Festival? Zhang Yunfan was single in Shanghai, so Mrs. Chang invited him to her home for dinner. Unfortunately, Mr. Chang had pawned off one of Mrs. Chang's rings one day, and Mrs. Chang quarreled with him. On the second day of the festival, her face turned yellow with anger, her stomach ached with gas, and she couldn't get up. She just sat down when the lights were turned on. I ate porridge on the pillow. There was a mahogany king table on the bed, and some pickles of various colors were placed on it. Downstairs, they kowtowed to worship their ancestors, and the guests were seated. The servants urged them several times, but Mrs. Chang just refused to go down. Mr. Chang smiled and raised his chopsticks to Zhang Yunfan and said, "Let's eat first, don't wait for her." Yunfan had to eat some vegetables in the cold basin. Chang smiled and said, "I'll come up and take a look." She walked down from the table, went to the kitchen and told them to wait while serving the shark's fins, and then went upstairs. Mrs. Chang was sitting on the bed, with a sullen face and drooped eyelids. One hand was holding the chopsticks, and the other hand was touching the cigarette tube filled with straw paper beside the pillow. She pulled up a large string of phlegm in one breath and spit it into it. After vomiting, "I went to eat porridge again." Chang quickly put her hand on the mouth of the bowl and persuaded, "Mom, let's go down and eat together. It's a once-a-year thing, and we can all get together. Besides, there are people here today." They were polite, but they didn't know the details behind it. "If there is something wrong with Dad, let's talk to him after today." I persuaded her from left to right, and forced her to comb her hair, clean her face, and change her clothes. Mrs. Chang just came downstairs with grievances. After nodding and greeting Yunfan, she called her son over from the table and sat beside her. He groped for him and said, "Have you called Brother Zhang? You look so black-faced and dark-eyed. How can you see anyone? Where have you played before and got all this mud on your new shoes? Don't even collapse it on the brown mat at the door." The boy just grabbed the almonds at the banquet and ate them. He refused to leave. He just whistled and called the big dog at home. He put his shoes on the dog's back and brushed away the mud. There are 2 or 3 big yellow dogs like the Zhang family. They are old and lazy, and their fur has fallen off in areas with ringworm. Lying in front of the door, they look like an old brown blanket at first glance. Shark's fin was served here. Mr. Chang looked up and saw that the whole family was here, but the only thing missing was the youngest son born by his concubine. Then he asked Ma Zhao, "Where is the young master?" Mother Zhao looked at his wife and said, "Nanny took her to the alley to play." Mr. Chang patted the table and said, "Damn, it's dinner at home. Why don't you call them? It's okay if you don't come to the table during the holidays. You have to eat the reunion dinner without serving it. Go and call the wet nurse back for me." Mrs. Chang frowned and said, "The vegetables are very oily today. How can I use my chopsticks?" Mother Zhao, "Go peel to preserved eggs and lay them for me." "Wine," Zhao Ma agreed, but she was a bit interested and didn't move. Mrs. Chang scolded, "Are you deaf? Tell you to peel the skinned eggs." Mama Zhao left in a hurry. Mr. Chang knocked the small silver cup on the table, spilled a hand of wine, lifted up his collar, stood up and walked out, and went to the alley to find the child in person. He went out through the back door, but the nanny came in through the front door with the child in her arms. Chang said, "Nanny, please put a stool behind me, add a pair of bowls and chopsticks, and feed him to mouthfuls at will, just for a while. That's all." When the bowls and chopsticks were brought, Mrs. Chang took the rice bowl, put some vegetables on it, and said, "Take it to the kitchen and eat it. I will be angry when I see it. You are so obscene. You can't get rid of it if you hold it in your hands again. Still a dirty piece of shit." The wet nurse took the child to the kitchen, and happened to meet Mr. Chang coming in from the back door. Seeing this, she couldn't help but got angry, grabbed the bowl with her hands, and smashed it to pieces. The child burst into tears when he saw that the food just about to reach his mouth flew away again. Mr. Chang kept asking to buy biscuits. The handyman asked, "Shall we buy them in bulk for 1 yuan as before?" Mr. Chang nodded. The nanny said, "Should I put the money first?" Mr. Chang nodded and said, "Embryo acid ding by Zhao Yang Mugu skeleton O Shao. How much does it cost to buy it? So as not to be unable to catch it when you are in a hurry." Mr. Chang said, "If you buy too much, we won't be able to store anything at home. If we want to eat next time, we still have to buy it now." Mrs. Chang heard it from inside and started making a fuss. "Who are you talking about? My child acted like a bitch and ate the leftover food of the son of a bitch, causing them to vomit and have diarrhea, and he died immediately." Mr. Chang sneered on the stairs. "What's the use of this curse of yours, vomiting and diarrhea? I know you have someone to treat him now." Zhang Yunfan didn't understand what he said after hearing this, but Chang had a look on his face. For a while, the shark fin was removed and replaced with a magical duck. While Mrs. Zhang was picking vegetables for Zhang Yunfan, she was troubled in her heart and with tears in her eyes. She said, "Mr. Zhang, do you think it's strange to see this situation in our family today? I don't treat you as an outsider. I am also willing to let you know what kind of life I have been living these years." Chang scooped some fried shrimps for Mr. Zhang. "Ask Chang. Ask her. She knows what kind of person her father is." "How can I?" She didn't say anything to her sisters for a day. I said, "Lancy, Lucy, Sally, Polly, you have to be careful. Don't be like your mother. If you meet someone unkindly and make your mother sad again, your mother can't bear it. I have told them since they were young, study hard. A woman must be able to stand on her own feet and be able to walk away from an unreasonable man." Alas, but Mr. Zhang, this is an ordinary woman. I can't. I am too emotional. Too emotional. Although I have never been to school, I do have the ability to be independent in cooking and sewing. I live alone. No matter how hard it is, I can always solve my own life. Although Mrs. Zhang has never been to school, she speaks new terms fluently. She said, "My bad thing is that I have rich emotions. I can't just watch my children being raped to death by her father." I thought, wait 2 years, when the children are older and no longer afraid of being manipulated to death, then I leave. Who knows that when they are older, there will be a younger one underneath. It's a pity that a mother's life has been sacrificed like this. She turned to let Zhao Ma serve the food behind her, and said, "Mr. Zhang, eat some hooves while they are hot. After all these years, you see he still treats me like this. But now I am not afraid of him." I said to him, "Yes, I am a poor woman. I am sick. I am a powerless woman. You may oppress me, but I have my children to protect me. Well, my daughter loves me. My son-in-law loves me." Chang felt uncomfortable and felt her chest was full and stuffy. So she rubbed her chest and said, "What happened to Enhui? He was so worried." Mrs. Zhang said, "Don't eat. Just drink some hot tea." Chang said, "I'll lean on the sofa to feel more comfortable." Then he walked to the living room on the other side of the Kyungmen and sat down. Here, Mrs. Zhang could not stop talking with all her heart in sorrow. Yun Fan said, "Auntie, don't just be sad. Your body can't bear it. I have to force myself to eat something." Mrs. Zhang scooped up a spoonful of buttered cauliflower, tasted it, frowned and said, "If you are tired of the scar, you might as well serve me a bowl of noodles. If there are hooves, it means hoof noodles." Everyone at the table had finished eating, and just when the food was served, Mrs. Zhang ate while saying that the noodles were cold, and asked for them to be heated up, and refused to pour tea for Mr. Zhang. Yun Fan hurriedly said, "I have tea in the living room. All you need to do is turn on the water." Take advantage of the situation and walk to the living room. A child chipped a corner of the porcelain cover on the lamp in the living room with a knife and a stick, so Chang always avoided turning on the light when he could. The room was dark, but Chang could be seen twisting her body and leaning on the armrest of the sofa. The fluffy long hair, with the light behind it, has a light and warm golden sweater flying on the edge. A pair of big eyes were fixed, shining slightly like mist in the clouds. Yunfan smiled and said, "Are you still feeling a little uncomfortable?" Chang sat upright and said with a smile, "Much better." Yunfan was surprised when he saw that she didn't turn on the lamp. After all, it was inconvenient for the two of them to face each other in secret, so they had to stand with their arms folded in the light coming from the doorway. Chang was facing the light, and he could see clearly that she was wearing a green-white silk robe, with no boundary between her white arms and white clothes. She was also wearing a unique necklace brought by her eldest brother-in-law from Paris. It was a pair of small gold hands, with sharp and long red nails clasped tightly round the neck, as if to strangle someone to death. She smiled and said, "Mr. Zhang, you rarely talk." Yunfan said with a smile, "I asked you if you were feeling better just now. If I continue to ask you, you will become like a doctor. I am afraid that you will never leave your profession." Chang smiled. Zhao Ma came in with a black kettle to make tea, and Chang grabbed a handful of candies in a tall glass basin, placed them in front of Yun Fan and said, "Eat candies." The doors of the Zheng family were always open in all directions. The wet nurse walked in from the front with the child in her arms and circled twice round the sofa. Mrs. Zheng was eating noodles in the next room, so she turned around and stared at her, saying to Chang, "Don't give him sweets. It will make him more unruly. When guests come, he will come around and be annoying." The wet nurse couldn't stand, so she had to carry the child to the back. After walking through the dining room, Mrs. Zheng saw that the child was holding a handful of biscuits in one hand and nibbling on a pear in his mouth, so she shouted, "Who gave him the pears? The basket of pears upstairs was a gift from my aunt's house, and I want to give it away. It can't be touched." "Who gave it to him?" The servants did not dare to agree. Mrs. Zheng put down her chopsticks and walked upstairs. Here Chang chatted and stood up. Yunfan thought she was going to turn on the light, but she turned on the radio instead. Because there was no proper coffee table, the radio was placed on the floor. Chang squatted on the ground and twisted the radio to release it. Yunfan followed him, sat on a sofa nearby, and said with a smile, "I like the light of the radio very much. This light always goes with the music." "Yes." Chang turned the radio softly and said softly, "I don't have any other ideals. I just hope that one day I can sleep with the radio on." Yunfan smiled and said, "That seems to be very easy." Chang smiled and said, "It can't be done in our family. No one needs to think about enjoying some happiness alone." Yunfan said, "That's possible. There are many people in the family, so there will inevitably be a bit of chaos." Chang slipped away quickly. He glanced at him, lowered his head, and sighed. "My father is actually just a child with a temper. My mother also has her difficulties. In fact, our family is really indebted to my mother because she is not in good health and cannot take care of her." Yunfan heard her defending her parents for no reason, as if he was dissatisfied with them. When he thought about what he just said, he didn't mean this. Both of them fell silent for a moment. Suddenly, she heard someone shouting at the back door, "The eldest lady and uncle are back." Chang seemed to feel that there was no light in the living room, which was a bit inappropriate, so she stood up and turned on the light. The light switch happened to be behind Yunfan's chair. She stood right in front of him. In just a moment, the hem of her robe covered the instep of his feet and then moved away. Her cheongsam was made extremely long and has long been out of fashion. This is all because Yun Fan told her brother-in-law that he likes women's cheongsam to be longer than their ankles. When she went abroad, she wore it in time. When she came back this year, she was wearing a cheongsam. Out of sight, only now did he notice her clothes, and he couldn't tell what he was feeling. The corner of her cheongsam seemed to be floating on the instep of his feet. Her dress must be old. It is long and ill-fitting. However, the dress that is too big has a special kind of allure. As she walks, it rises again and again. Where there are people. In the trembling place where there is no one, the clothes are trembling. Virtual and real and virtual. Extremely mysterious. Chang welcomed her out, and her sister and brother-in-law walked in with their 3-year-old daughter in their arms and greeted Yun Fan. That autumn summer, it was August on the lunar calendar, and her brother-in-law was still wearing a floral silk Hong Kong shirt. Chang smiled and said, "My elder brother-in-law is getting more and more beautiful." Her sister smiled and said, "Emperor Aosha told me that he looked 25 years younger." Her brother-in-law smiled and took the child's hand to beat her. Her sister Quanjuan talks non-stop, like carrying a coppersmith's burden with shattering iron pieces hanging on it. She carries her own monotonous liveliness wherever she goes. Yunfan himself didn't need to speak, so he wouldn't worry about saying the wrong thing, but at the same time he was willing to listen to Sichuan Chang say a few more words. He was a little disappointed that he didn't have the chance to hear it. Chang felt similarly. Her younger brother came to pay her respects to her eldest sister. Quanjuan smiled and said, "What good food did you eat today?" "Did you leave it for me?" Her brother said, "Don't worry, I didn't hide anything good from you. There was a nail in the shrimp." Quanjuan hurriedly told him to silence and said, "Don't let Mr. Zhang hear it. People pay attention to hygiene. If you look back and get suspicious, You should have a stomachache. Her brother smiled and said, It doesn't matter. Isn't my eldest brother-in-law also a very hygienic person? In the past, he didn't think we were bad cooks and came to eat every day, which deceived my eldest sister. I won't come now, and I won't be able to invite him. Quan smiled and said, His mouth is just what my mother spoiled. Chang blushed because these words were too explicit, and it was inconvenient to attack his brother in front of others. Yunfan hurriedly interrupted. Are you going to dance today? Quan said. Isn't it too late? Yunfan said. It's a big holiday. It doesn't matter if it's a little late. Chang smiled and said, Mr. Zhang is so happy today. She tried several times with words to test him, and felt that although he was not particularly happy, he was not unhappy at all. It shows that he tolerates everything about her family. Knowing this, I feel at ease. That day, my sister and my husband went out to dance with them. When she came back late at night and went to bed, Chang recalled that she had just come out of the dance hall and walked a long way to call a car. The four of them walked side by side holding hands tightly, and his elbow happened to be pressed against her chest. Superior, although they danced together, they could never be closer than this. She blushed at the thought and decided to wear high heels next time she went out so that she could be at the same height as him when walking side by side. But that's not right. It's not right no matter what. And besides, what's this little bit of contact? What if he kissed her next time they were alone? It's too early. We've only known each other for a short time. I'll make him look down on me in the future. But after all, the family has already acquiesced. She had a fever on her face that didn't subside for a long time. We made an appointment to go out together the next day, but she fell ill and didn't go. After being ill for more than a month, Mr. Zhang and Mrs. Zhang no longer wanted to avoid suspicion and asked Zhang Yunfan for a diagnosis. Chang has been in good health since she was a child. She has never been sick and has no habit of taking off her clothes in front of the doctor. For her, undressing was a physical examination. She was so thin that her ribs and hips stood out. What should he think? Did his future wife disappoint him too much? Of course, there was no expression on his face, only a Christian joy, the typical clinical attitude of ordinary doctors. And he said with a smile, Take care of it patiently. It doesn't matter if it's important. How do you feel today? You can drink orange water in 2 days. I'm done. She hated the way he acted, as if she was not a woman, just a patient. There are also several types of patients in the luxurious bedroom, with curtains, curly hair, light silk pajamas edged with white rabbit skin, and a brocade sleeping jacket draped on the bed. Modern Lindayu also has her unique charm. Changki didn't even have a decent pajama, so she put on her mother's white cloth gown. She hadn't bathed in a long time, and the sheets hadn't been changed. That sick smell. She was not happy with Dr. Zhang. She felt as if he came to see her unexpectedly when she was not dressed up. People who are dressed more raggedly than usual are more rude than usual when meeting guests. Chang was so sick that she couldn't bear it. She tried to get up several times, but could she get through it if she couldn't? Mrs. Zhang couldn't stop her, so she had to tell her. Mr. Zhang said she had lung disease. Zhang Yunfan came to see her every day and gave her free air injections. Whenever his hands gently pressed against her chest and ribs, with slightly cool and scientific fingers, she would turn her head to stare at the blue sky outside the window, the contact that I have always longed for. Yes, one day, but I never thought it would be like this. Unexpectedly, this is the case. Her eyes were covered with a shell of water. She opened her eyes wide, not blinking for fear of breaking them. What would it be like to cry to him? He was very considerate and always asked after the injection, How much does it hurt? She nodded, and her tears fell to the ground. Her flesh slipped beneath his fingers. She is losing weight day by day. Her face was like a frame stretched with white satin, and her eyes were like two big scorching holes with lanterns falling on the satin. The more urgent it is, the better. Chang knew that Yunfan was 7 or 8 years older than her, and his parents had repeatedly urged him to get married as soon as possible. He could also see her uneasiness. Once, after the injection, There was no one in the room. She thought he had left, but she heard a clank on the table as he moved the medicine bottle and glass. After a long moment of silence, he held the fleece blanket behind her neck, stuffed it tighter, and said in a low voice, "I'm always waiting for you." This was half a year later. She said nothing. She put her hand inside the pillowcase, and a section of her wrist was exposed between the pillowcase and the quilt. She knew he would interfere, and she hoped he would hold her hand and tuck her into bed. "Sure enough," he said, "don't expose your hands. They're freezing." She didn't move because she was lying on the bed. He wanted to avoid suspicion, so he had to smile like a child. "Quick, put your hand in. Be obedient, and it will be better soon." She automatically retracted her hand. There was a time when she felt better, then she fell behind and got worse again. After 2 years of illness, he became tuberculosis. She vaguely seemed to know that Yen Fan had someone else. Mr. Jung and Mrs. Jung discussed with Kwon Juin. Just tell her and let her give up. This confusion will only make her sick. Then she told her honestly, Yun Fan has a girlfriend. Her name is Yu Mizing. She is a nurse. Chuan Chang said. Have you seen her? Kwon Juin said. I played mahjong with her twice. Chuan Chang said. Why didn't I hear you mention it? Kwon Juin said. I didn't know who she was at the time, so I didn't think of telling you. Chuan Chang felt that the heat was rising and her palms were burning uncomfortably, so she stuffed them in a pillowcase to cool them. He said, I'm always waiting for you. The words were still ringing in his ears, but he couldn't blame him. He had been waiting for her for almost 2 years, and now it was probably concluded that her disease was hopeless. Hopeless. In the future, it is expected that there will be another 10 years of beauty, 10 years of limelight, and 20 years of glory and wealth. Is this the end? Mrs. Jung said. Why are you digging your hands into the pillowcase? Chuan Chang said. Look for one of my handkerchiefs. After saying this, she regretted that she would not let others think that she had found a handkerchief to wipe her tears. Mrs. Jung was considerate and did not ask any further questions. She just bent down and patted her, and said softly, Why haven't you fastened the buttons on the pillowcase? Chuan Chang said with a smile, I like to do it when I'm asleep and have nothing to do. It is peeled off and buttoned one by one. As he said that, he went to button the buttons. After buttoning it halfway, she grabbed the pillowcase tightly and pressed the small point of the button into the palm of her hand, until it was nailed through the palm of her hand, and then she vented the hatred in her heart. Chuan Chang expressed repeatedly that she wanted to meet Miss Yu Mizing. Mrs. Jung felt sorry for her daughter's marriage, but also had the same curiosity. So she taught Kwon Juin to invite Dr. Zhang and Miss Yu to play cards. This Yu Mizing has a round face, narrow eyebrows and eyes, and a short figure. She wears a thin black woolen coat with a small iron boat pin on her lapel. She looks humble. Before entering the game, she accompanied Dr. Zhang and went upstairs to visit the patient. When Chuan Chang saw this man with an ordinary appearance, his first unreasonable feeling was that of relief. The second feeling is that she blames her lover for being so ignorant. He has been in a difficult situation. So why did he choose such a second-rate role? It is an insult to the people in front of him. The third and strongest feeling is resentment. Because she loves him, she believes that only a gorgeous woman is worthy of him. Yu Mizing was both unqualified and unsatisfied. He deliberately curled his lips to quarrel with him in front of others, and glanced at him whenever he could. Mizing's catchphrases, that's what Yun Fan is. It seems that he has a lot to criticize. Chuan Chang heard this and was shocked and angry. Yun Fan in her heart is the most ideal person. Yes. She only knew Yun Fan's benefits. Yun Fan's shortcomings would have to be discovered slowly after the other woman married him. However, she couldn't be such a woman. However, Yu Mizing also has her own merits. She took off her coat, and in the middle of winter, she only wore a silk robe with bare arms. It was red, yellow, purple and green, and the whole body was full of drunken colors. Although Chuan Chang hadn't gone out for a long time, she guessed that it must be the latest popular clothing material. Wearing so thinly, Yu Mizing didn't look shivering at all. She is fat, but so fat that she is nervous. In comparison, Sichuan Chang felt even more ashamed. What did Yu Mizing think when he saw her? Mei Zhang must also have heard about the relationship between Dr. Zhang and the lung disease patient. Should she also blame her lover for being too short-sighted? Chang had already considered this and asked someone to find a photo she had taken the year before and press it under the glass of the square table. As expected, Mei Zhang bent down and looked at it for a long time. She didn't ask, "Who is this?" She looked and looked. If it had been taken by a famous photo studio, there would have been English text embossed at the bottom of the picture, but there wasn't. She asked with a smile, "Where did you take the photo?" Chang said, "It's a place near here." Mei Zhang said, "The small photo studio takes pictures, and the person is photographed like a prisoner. That's why okay." Chang couldn't answer for a while. Mei Zhang said again, "But Miss Zhang, you really look good in the photo." He meant that although the photo is ugly, it is 3 points better than the person in question. After Mizing Yunfan left, everyone felt the need to comfort Sichuan Chang. Even Mr. Zhang, who never came to his daughter's room for fear of contagion, came upstairs. He puffed heavily on cigar smoke, creating a smoke screen for self-defense. Chang deliberately acted like he didn't mind, but instead brought the topic to Yu Mizing. Everyone commented, and Quan Juan said, "She's not necessarily good-looking." Mrs. Zhang said, "I don't agree with her style." Mr. Zhang thought they were too openly jealous, so he smiled deliberately and said, "I said she is quite beautiful." Chang said with a smile, "By the way, Dad likes that figure." Quan Juan said, "Dad likes people to be fat." Mr. Zhang said with a smile, "No wonder Zhang Yunfan wanted to see her. One of them is fatter, has really tired of seeing patients." Chang smiled and said, "Dad is a light-tongued man." Mrs. Zhang later returned to her room and sighed, "It's a pity that she still holds on and doesn't show up. This child must be strong." Mr. Zhang said, "I'm not being discouraged. I can't treat Si Matu next spring ... double quotes." As he said that, he couldn't help but burst into tears. Quan Juan handed over a prescription and said, "Yunfan just prescribed a prescription. This kind of medicine is not available in his clinic." He asked people to go to major pharmacies to buy it and try it. Mrs. Zhang said to Mr. Zhang, "Give the money to the handyman first and ask him to buy it early tomorrow morning." Mr. Zhang opened his eyes and said in surprise, "What is the price of Western medicine now? You like to buy stocks of pharmaceutical companies. You should know it. She will die tomorrow. How can we survive?" Mrs. Zhang couldn't hear the words about stocks, and her face turned pale with anxiety, and said, "What are you talking about?" Mr. Zhang said, "You can do whatever you want with your money. You have to spend your money happily. Spending it on medicine with a bitter face is enough injustice. This child has been ill for 1 and 2 years. Not only you. You also love to sacrifice and look for sacrifices. Even I have been burdened and sacrificed a lot. Not to mention sorry for her, the fat chicken and the big duck ying you play with 2 apples a day. What kind of time is it now? I can't even support my concubine. She eats apples. I think that's all we can do. If she wants to come up with something new, if you have money, you can buy it for her." Mrs. Zhang thought that if she bought it for her with money, it would prove that she had private money saved. After thinking about it, I could only ask Yun Fan to find a way. That night, while Chang was taking medicine in the middle of the night, he told Chang the truth and said, "Yun Fan has helped us a lot. Ever since you got sick, he has not done everything by himself. Now he has my friend. If we just ignore it, it will make people gossip, and it will seem like he was all selfish in the past. For this reason alone, he has to deal with us once." After hearing this, Chang was like 1,000 arrows piercing her heart. "I thought of what Yu Mizing said today. Is Miss Zhang very bored? From now on, I will come to talk to you after work every day, and I will ride with you in the doctor's car." Okay, that clearly meant deliberate supervision. There is Yu Mizing, who is watching eagerly beside him. He is also ignorant and pestering Yun Fan life and death, asking for this and that, making things difficult for him. So shameful. Her parents must come up with money. Her disease is incurable. No wonder they don't want to throw money into the water. In the past 2 years, various places have made it difficult for them. All in all, she's a drag. She is a drag on the world. This colorful world is full of all kinds of pleasant things in the windows, large menus, fashion samples, the most artistic rooms, which are empty except for the large glass windows with high ceilings, carpets, and colorful there are soft cushions. And children. Oh, of course, she wants children. Western-style children. Wrapped in plush clothes and bunny-eared hats, like the ones on Christmas cards. When they cry, they can ask the wet nurse to take them out. Chang herself is also lovely. When people want her, she gets what she wants. It's all her fault. But now, she herself is dying inch by inch, and this lovely world is also dying inch by inch. Everything she laid her eyes on and touched with her fingers died immediately. Yu Mizing was wearing delicate clothes, and Quan Juan had recently bought a house with new furniture, but this had lost its meaning to Sichuan Chang. If she doesn't exist, these don't exist. Children who have not been loved by their families since childhood always have a feeling of insignificance. Chang originally felt that she was insignificant, but since she fell ill and thought about herself all day long, her self-concept gradually expanded. The huge self, and this rotten and beautiful world. The two corpses are tied back to back. You are falling to me, and I am falling to you, sinking. She couldn't bear the pain. She wanted to kill herself earlier. In the morning, before her parents got up, Zhao Ma went to the temple to burn incense, while the cook was buying vegetables. There was only one new member of the family, Molly, who didn't know anything. She asked Molly to carry her downstairs and hired a girl for her, a rickshaw. She lay on Molly's back like a cold and white spider. She had $50 with her, planning to buy a bottle of sleeping pills and then get a room in a hotel for the night. She hadn't been out for a long time, and she didn't expect that her living standards had risen to this level. $50 couldn't buy sleeping pills, and besides, she didn't have a doctor's certificate. She drove around in a rickshaw in a daze, had a meal at a Western restaurant, and sat in a movie theater for 2 hours. She wants to look at Shanghai again. When Chang went out, she never had the chance to notice anything outside her body because she was too busy being noticed. She didn't expect that this innocuous habit would cause her so much pain today. People everywhere looked at her with horror, as if she were a monster. The death she wanted was a poetic, moving death. But there is no compassion in people's eyes. She remembered two poems often found in the memory books of her classmates. Laugh, and the whole world will laugh with you. Cry, and you cry alone. The world does not lack sympathy for the sorrow of others. Kinzumai. Pays filial piety. The little monk crying souls, the little widow visiting the grave, and Sichuan Chang's mother committing suicide. It is not difficult to make people cry together. As long as it's dramatic and falsely sad, they can accept it. But when they really meet someone who is in pain, they just open their eyes wide and say, "This woman is so thin. She's afraid." The Zheng family lost their patient, and they searched separately. They called the ferry company, the Bun Park, major hotels, and major companies. They spent a whole day in chaos. In the evening, Chang came back and went upstairs in the electrical silence of the whole house. Mrs. Zheng came into the room, and when she was about to cross-examine and scold her, Chang leaned on the pillow panting, using a mirror to comb her straight curly hair, and braided the sweaty hair into two small braids. Mrs. Zheng couldn't help but said, "Why don't you take a break from cooking steamed buns? Where did you go for the day?" Chang loosened her grip, threw away the mirror, suddenly hugged her mother, lay on her mother's back and cried loudly, saying, "Mother, Mom, why have I become so ugly?" She asked again and again. And her mother also cried. But sometimes Chang is also very optimistic. When the weather is nice, the pillow clothes have been newly dried in the sun, and the smell of the sun remains on the pillow. Mrs. Zheng found a small shoe shop outside the alley with extremely cheap prices. I bought 2 pairs of shoes for each person in the family. Although Chang didn't get out of bed for the whole year, he bought her 2 pairs of embroidered shoes and 1 pair of leather shoes. Of course, the clothes are too big now, so if you replenish your muscles, they will fit you when you gain weight. Soon she was trying to lose weight again, eating only carrots and oranges and doing calisthenics in the morning and evening. Chang put one foot into the leather shoe and tried it on. Then said, "This kind of leather looks very strong and can be worn for 2 or 3 years." She died 3 weeks later, February 1944.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.